The bell rings before you are ready. It will ring before you are ready tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that. For 7 days this will be your life. You will rise in darkness. You will stand in cold stone chapels before your body has finished sleeping. You will work with stiff fingers in rooms that never truly warm. You will eat little. You will speak less. And when night comes, you will not rest for long. This is not a question of faith. It is a question of endurance. Could you last a week doing the work of a medieval monk? The first test begins in the hour furthest from dawn. The bell at Vigils does not ring when you have slept enough. It does not wait for comfort. It rings in the deep of the night, and you rise because it has rung. Rising when the bell rings is the first demand placed upon you. Not dramatic, not violent, but absolute. The dormitory is cold. The straw mattress on the wooden frame is the only thing that held warmth, and you have just left it. You feel its absence at once. The chill of the stone floor through the soles of your feet. The air finding your face and hands above the rough wool of your habit. The garment goes on first. The same tunic you wore yesterday. The same you will wear tomorrow. Undyed wool, heavy and plain. The scapula over it. The belt by touch in the dark. No candle is permitted at this hour. Your hands have learned to work without light. You are awake, but you are not rested, and this is only the first morning. Around you in the dark, the other shapes are rising. You hear them more than see them. The rustle of wool, the soft footfall on stone, the suppressed cough of a man who has slept in a cold room too long. No one speaks. Speaking in the dormitory passage is not done, not at this hour, not any hour. The great silence that fell at Compline last night has not yet lifted, will not lift until after prime, and in the silence the night sounds of 20 or 30 men dressing and moving toward the stairs have a particular quality, muffled and deliberate and somehow heavier than ordinary sound, as though the silence gives each small noise more weight. You follow the shape ahead of you down the stairs. The night stair descends directly from the dormitory into the south transept of the church, built this way by design, so that the monks can pass from sleep to prayer with the minimum of exposure to the outside world, the night, the cold, the distractions of the cloister. In practice, the stair is its own exposure, unlit, except for the small lamp at the bottom landing, the steps worn in their centers by the passage of feet over generations, each step slightly concave in a way that your own feet have memorized, so that the descent happens in the dark with a confidence borrowed from all the feet that came before you. The church receives you. This is always the word that comes, receives. The church is cold, colder than the dormitory, the vast space of it unable to hold warmth the way an enclosed room can, the stone of the nave reaching up into darkness and staying dark, the roof invisible. But it receives you in the way that a very old and serious place receives the people who come to it, without ceremony, without acknowledgement, with only its own permanent presence, the smell of old incense and cold stone and beeswax, and the particular smell of a space that has been breathed in by men at prayer for longer than any of them has been alive. The candles on the altar are already lit. Someone came before the bell, the hebdomadarian, the brother whose week it is to lead the offices, and lit them, and they stand in the dark of the chancel burning with a steadiness that the darkness around them makes more beautiful. Two flames in the immensity of the unlit church, giving just enough light to see the choir stalls and the faces of the brothers filing in and finding their places. You find your stall. The wood is cold under your hands when you grip the misericord to lower yourself. The small projecting ledge that allows you to appear to stand while actually resting your weight. The monk's concession to the long hours of office, worn smooth by the hands of every monk who has stood here before you. You pull the hood closer. You wait for the office to begin. The first psalm opens in the dark. The voice of the cantor, on its own at first, is a sound that has nowhere to go in the cold church except up, and up is where it goes, climbing into the vaulted dark above the choir, finding the stone and returning changed, enriched by the stone's response, the single voice becoming something larger than a single voice, before the brothers take it up on the other side in the antiphon. This is the sound of Vigils, the psalms moving back and forth across the choir in the call and response that the rule prescribes, voices and stone in conversation, the Latin of the Psalter filling the dark church with something that is not warmth, but is, in its way, sufficient. You know these psalms, or you are learning them, or you have known them so long they exist beneath thought, below the level of language, the words arriving in your mouth before your mind has produced them. The way a path walked 1,000 times is walked without looking at your feet. This is the goal, that the office should become not a thing you do, but a thing you are. The psalms not recited, but breathed. The prayer not performed, but inhabited. You are not there yet. Some of the brothers are not there yet. Some of them have been here 30 years, and are there completely, their mouths moving, and their eyes closed, and their faces carrying an expression that is not bliss and not concentration, but something calmer than both, the expression of a person who is doing the thing they were made to do. The office lasts an hour, perhaps longer. Time inside the church at Vigils is not the time of the outside world. It does not move in the way that waking time moves, measured against tasks and light. It moves the way water moves underground, consistently, invisibly, arriving somewhere without your noticing the journey. When it is over, you file out in silence. The night air in the cloister is very cold, colder than the church, open on one side to the square of sky above the garth. There are stars still, the sky in the east not yet changing, the night not yet committed to ending. You can see your breath, the small clouds of it drifting in the stillness of the arcade. You walk the cloister walk quickly, your sandaled feet on the stone flags, back toward the dormitory and the 2 hours of sleep that remain before Lord's. The dormitory stairs, the dormitory, the straw mattress. You lie down in your clothes. You do not fully sleep. The body, pulled out of its rest once, is cautious about committing to it again so soon, wary of the bell, as though the bell has established itself as a presence that can arrive at any moment, and the body does not want to be caught deeply under when it does. You drift in the shallow water near sleep, not warm, not entirely awake, the mind doing something that is not quite thinking and not quite dreaming, a kind of neutral processing in which the psalms from Vigils sometimes surface, the Latin arriving in fragments, the words of the antiphon moving through the half-consciousness without intention or meaning, just language dissolved into the state between sleeping and waking. The dormitory around you is full of this same state. You cannot hear it exactly. The silence is maintained even in sleep, or as close to sleep as this is. But you feel it, the particular quality of a room full of people who have recently been at prayer and are now horizontal in the dark. 20 or 30 men breathing in the slow rhythm of not quite sleep. The dormitory a single entity rather than a collection of individuals, a collective breath. The cold above the blanket does not improve. The straw mattress, which the rule specifies as the appropriate bedding for monks of this house, is not uncomfortable exactly. It is the kind of surface that a body adapts to over time, learning to find the arrangement that gives it the most rest. But it is what it is, which is straw on a wooden frame in a cold room, and you are aware of it in a way that you suspect you will be less aware of it in a month, when the body has finished its adjustments, when the straw has become simply the surface you sleep on rather than a condition you are managing. The Psalms of Lords are the Psalms of mourning, the Psalms that address the coming light, that speak of the night ending and the day beginning in the vocabulary of praise and expectation. There is a quality to singing them in the dark, before the light they describe has arrived, that is not ironic, but is something like faith made physically explicit. You are praising the dawn before it comes. You are speaking the morning into existence with your voice, and the morning comes. It always comes, while you are doing it. The light arriving during the office, the east window above the altar revealing itself as the psalms proceed, a shape of glass becoming visible that an hour ago was nothing, and then a shape of color, blue, or the suggestion of blue, and then the figures in the glass, barely, the outlines of the thing that will be fully itself when the sun is fully up. The bell rings, Lords, the office of dawn, though dawn at this season is still an hour away when Lords begins. The calendar of the offices and the calendar of the light out of alignment at this latitude in winter. The hours prescribed for before dawn occurring in a darkness that shows no sign of relenting. You rise again. The same cold floor, the same dark corridor, the same stair. The church has barely changed. The candles on the altar still burning. A new candle in the choir for the hebdomadarian's book. The wax of the Vigils candles lower. But something in the quality of the dark has shifted. The darkness less total, as though the night outside has relented very slightly, without yet conceding. Or perhaps this is only the fact of your returning eyes, adjusted to the dark after 2 hours of horizontal waiting. By the time Lord's ends, there is light. Not full light, not the light that will come with the working hours, but light enough to see the face of the brother across the choir, to see the color of the stone, to see that the world outside the east window is grey and bare and cold and real and present, and there again, return from the dark the way it always returns, reliable in its returning. You file out. Prime follows quickly. The short office of first light, almost perfunctory in its brevity compared with Vigils, the body of the day not yet fully committed to beginning. After Prime, the great silence lifts, and the first voices of the day are heard in the cloister. Not many, not loudly. Just the natural resumption of speech after the long quiet of the night, men exchanging the small necessary words of a community beginning its day. Then the work begins. The first work of the morning, after the offices, is in the scriptorium. The scriptorium is on the east side of the cloister, adjacent to the chapter house, a long room with windows facing north. north windows specifically, for the even light they provide, a light without the direct sun that would create glare on the vellum and make fine work difficult. The room is cold in winter, but less cold than the church. The windows glazed in some of the bays and shuttered in others, the stone floors covered in part with rush matting. At the long writing desks, the carrels, each one a shallow wooden bay that gives the monk at it a degree of separation from his neighbours, a small notional privacy in a life that has very little actual privacy. The brothers are taking their places. You sit at your carrel. The vellum on the slanted desk before you is a sheet prepared weeks ago, the skin of a calf scraped and stretched and dried and scraped again to a surface of fine pale cream, almost translucent at its thinnest, with a slight grain to it that the pen will find and sometimes resist. You ruled the lines yourself, yesterday or the day before, using the lead point and the edge of a thin board, the ruled lines barely visible, but there, a skeleton of structure under the text that will go in above it. Around the vellum, waiting, are the things that belong to a scriptorium morning. The pen case with its quills cut and trimmed to the appropriate widths, the ink in its small horns set into the desk, the pumice for erasing mistakes, the knife for trimming the quill point when it spreads. The work you are copying is a psalter, or a commentary, or a set of homilies, or whatever the sacrist has determined is most needed in the library this season, the endless work of the scriptorium that accumulates over years and decades into the library's holdings, each book a season's work or more, each page a morning's careful attention. What you are copying has been given to you open, propped at the correct angle, the text you must reproduce clearly visible, the exemplar from which your copy will be made. The text is from the letters of one of the fathers of the early church, a man dead for centuries, his words travelling through the copies of copies that preceded this exemplar, each one reproduced by a hand like yours in a room like this. The text surviving by exactly this means someone sitting down every morning and copying. You dip the pen. The ink is cold. Cold ink does not flow as well as warm ink, and on cold mornings in the scriptorium, the ink is always the first difficulty. It thickens slightly, wants to clog the nib, wants to deposit too much on the first stroke and too little on the next. There are brothers who warm their inkhorn against their bodies before beginning, holding it inside the habit at the chest for a few minutes while they settle themselves and examine the exemplar. You do this now. The horn is a small, smooth thing against your ribs, and the warmth of your body communicates itself to the ink slowly, the ink becoming gradually more willing. The pen goes down. The first letter of the morning is always the most deliberate, the moment when the hand and eye are still calibrating, still refinding the relationship between the NAB and the vellum that existed at the end of yesterday's session, but has been lost in the intervening night and must be recovered. You feel it in the first stroke, the slight uncertainty, the assessment, and then you feel it resolve, the hand remembering, the pressure finding the right weight on the vellum, the angle of the pen finding the hairline stroke that begins the letter. This morning the work goes well. The work does not always go well. There are mornings when the hand will not cooperate, when the letters come out crowded or too widely spaced, when the ink blots at an inopportune moment and a careful stroke is ruined, when the mind wanders and the eye loses its place in the exemplar, and several words are copied twice or skipped entirely, requiring erasure and correction, and the knowledge that the vellum, once erased, is never quite as clean as it was, carries always the ghost of the error. On those mornings the scriptorium is a place of quiet suffering. Today the letters are coming evenly, the text moving across the vellum with something approaching order. You feel the satisfaction of it in a specific way, a satisfaction that has no ambition in it. Not the satisfaction of a craftsman proud of his skill, not pride at all, but something simpler and more immediate. The satisfaction of the body doing its work without friction, the pen and the hand and the eye in agreement. The room is very quiet. This is one of the things about the scriptorium that will either suit you or it will not. The quality of its silence. It is not the imposed silence of the night, not the silence of the rule as observed in the dormitory and the cloister after Compline. It is a working silence, the silence of a room full of people engaged in the same demanding task, a silence that is not empty, but full, threaded through with the sounds of the work itself, the scratch of quills on vellum, the occasional soft sound of a brother turning the page of his exemplar, the small adjustments of men sitting for long periods on wooden benches, the fire in the corner hearth, small, carefully managed, the only warmth. You copy through the morning. The copying is not the same as reading. This is the first important thing the scriptorium teaches. You can copy a text without reading it, the eye finding each letter of the exemplar, and the hand reproducing it without the mind processing the meaning, the text passing through you rather than into you. This is not the correct way. The correct way, the way the senior brothers do it, the way you are learning to do it, is to take the meaning with the letter, to let the text you are copying be understood as you copy it, so that the work of the hand and the work of the mind happen simultaneously, the writing and the receiving of what is written a single act rather than two separate ones. This is very difficult to sustain for a full morning. The mind wanders. This is the constant of the scriptorium, the thing that no one discusses but everyone understands. The mind, given a repetitive physical task to occupy the hand, goes elsewhere. It goes to the meal at supper last night, to the brother who coughed through vigils and whose cough has a sound that bears watching, to the letter from home that has been sitting unread since it arrived yesterday, and when the mind returns to the work, the eye must find its place again in the exemplar, sometimes discovering that several words have been copied twice, the hand continuing on autopilot while the mind was away, producing a faithful mechanical reproduction of the wrong thing. You discover this mid-morning, 3 words repeated, a small loop of error in the line. The pumice is for exactly this. You take the small, smooth piece and work it carefully over the error, the vellum lightening as the ink is lifted away, the surface slightly roughened by the pumice, no longer as clean as it was. This roughened surface takes the ink differently when you write over it, the letter slightly less crisp, the ghost of the error faintly readable if you know to look. A good scribe minimizes these corrections. A good scribe is always almost entirely in the work, the mind and the hand in their correct relationship, the meaning of the text flowing through the pen onto the vellum, with a continuity that the correction disrupts. You pump the pumice and correct the error, and you return the pen to the inkhorn, and you find your place in the exemplar, and you continue. The light in the north windows changes as the morning progresses, not dramatically. It is a grey day, a day in the season when the sky offers a flat, even light that is neither bright nor dark, but simply present, but perceptibly, the angle of it shifting, the quality of it changing hour by hour, in ways that the experienced eye notices even without looking directly at the window. You are aware of the light, the way you are aware of the office hours, as a structure beneath the work, a scaffolding you do not examine but depend on. At terce the bell rings. You set the pen down. You blot the last letter. You cap the inkhorn and set the pen in its case with the care that the instruments require. A quill left uncapped will dry. An inkhorn spilled is an afternoon's work ruined. And you rise from the carrel and straighten your back, which has been bent over the desk since prime, and which speaks now briefly and clearly about what it thinks of that. The office of terce is brief, bright, the psalms brisk after the long, slow patience of vigils and lauds. It has the quality of a door opened in the middle of the morning, the community gathered for 20 minutes, and then released again into the working hours, the day checked in on, and then resumed. After terce, the morning opens into its second half, the longer stretch before sext and the midday meal. Some of the brothers return to the scriptorium. Some go to the garden. Some go to the infirmary, where the sick brothers need attendance, reading and physic, and the small acts of care that are part of the monastic work, as much as copying manuscripts or singing offices. You have been assigned to the garden today, after terce, because the garden does not keep itself in winter any more than the manuscripts copy themselves, and your hands, after 2 hours at the carrel, are ready for the different work of being outdoors. The garden is enclosed within the cloister precinct, adjacent to the kitchen garden that supplies the table, separated from it by a low stone wall. It is the physic garden, the garden of herbs grown for their uses in the infirmary, the plants that the infirmarian requires in their dried forms through the winter, that must be tended through the cold months, with enough attention to preserve the roots and the established plants through to spring. In summer, this garden is a dense, fragrant, complex space, every bed full, the paths barely passable between the grown-out herbs. In January it is reduced to its skeleton, the bare earth of the beds, the cut-back stems, the rosemary and the sage that hold their grey-green through the cold, the lavender cut low, the hardy thyme still present at the edges of the paths, flat against the ground in the frost. You work the beds. The work is the work of January gardens everywhere, clearing the last of the dead growth, the stems of things that were cut back in autumn, but not fully removed, the accumulated debris of fallen leaves that have blown in over the wall from the orchard. You use the short-handled hoe and the hand tools, moving along the beds methodically, turning the surface of the soil where it needs turning, working around the established roots, checking the straw mulch that was laid over the most tender plants in November to see if it has shifted or thinned and needs reinforcement. The cold in the garden is outdoor cold, the cold of a January morning in the open air, and it is different from the cold of the scriptorium in the way that all outdoor cold is different from indoor cold, more honest, more complete, demanding a direct response rather than accommodation. Your hands inside the rough working gloves, a concession of the season, worn only when the cold makes them necessary, are cold inside the gloves as well, the gloves keeping the wind out, but not the deep chill of handling frozen soil. You work quickly, partly from necessity, and partly from the knowledge that moving generates warmth, that stillness will not. The cloister garth is visible from the garden over the low wall, the square of grass at its centre, grey-green in the winter, the stone arcade of the cloister walk surrounding it on 4 sides, the chapter house at the east end of the south walk. The proportions of the cloister are such that the garth always looks the same size regardless of where you stand in it, a mathematical quality that you noticed early and have thought about since. Something about the ratio of the open space to the enclosed walk that makes the eye return to a sense of calm each time it looks up from whatever it was doing. This was not accidental. The men who built this place built it, knowing something about how space acts on the mind. You straighten up and look at the garth. A single crow is on the grass in the center of the garth, examining something with the thorough professional interest of a crow. The crow has no business being in the cloister garth. There is no rule that covers crows. The crow is indifferent to the rule. You go back to the beds. Sext rings before you have finished the last bed. This is always the way of garden work. It does not complete itself within the time available. It simply continues until the time runs out and is resumed the next time is available. You put the tools back in the shed at the corner of the garden wall. The hoe and the trowel and the small sickle for cutting back the woody growth, hanging them in their places on the wooden pegs. You wash your hands at the stone basin near the shed, the water very cold, moving quickly. The office of sext is the midpoint of the day, the axis on which the hours turn. After sext, dinner. The refectory is the longest room on the west side of the cloister, a high-ceilinged room with windows on both sides, the tables running its length in the arrangement of a monastic meal. The brothers on the benches along the sides, the prior's table at the end, the reader's pulpit raised above the floor level on the north wall. You file in the order prescribed, seniority from the door, the oldest members nearest the high table, the most recent arrivals farthest from it, and you stand behind your place at the table and wait for the blessing. The blessing is said. You sit. The meal begins in silence, as the rule requires. The only voice in the refectory for the first part of the meal, the voice of the reader on his pulpit. One of the brothers, appointed for the week, reading aloud from whatever text has been selected by the prior. Today it is the dialogues, the voice of the reader rising above the sound of the meal, with a formal clarity that is neither conversational nor performative, but something specific to this purpose, a voice calibrated for a room and an audience and a purpose, the text moving through the space above the eating brothers and doing whatever it does to them, instructing, consoling, diverting, providing the intellectual dimension of the meal that the physical dimension is inadequate to supply on its own. The food arrives. The rule of the house regarding food is the rule of sufficiency and simplicity, enough to sustain the work, nothing in excess, the flavors that come from skill in the kitchen rather than richness of the ingredient. In winter this means the root vegetables that were stored in autumn, the turnips and parsnips and onions, the dried beans and peas that make the pottage thick and sustaining, the hard cheese and the dried fish, the bread from the ovens that the baker brother tends with the same daily attention you bring to the scriptorium. There is no meat at table, or almost none. The rule is firm on this for most of the community, though the infirmary table is different. The sick permitted what their bodies require. The bread is good. This is a thing you have noticed in your first days here. The quality of the bread, dense and even, with a crust that has a specific sound when broken. the crumb inside tight and consistent and tasting of the grain itself, the wheat grown in the abbey's own fields to the south of the precinct, ground in the abbey's mill, brought in sacks to the kitchen each week. When you hold the bread in your hands in the refectory, it is warm, slightly, the warmth of the oven still in it, and this warmth is real and present in the same way the warmth of the office fire is real, small, exact, sufficient. You eat carefully. The eating of meals in the refectory has its own grammar, its own pace. Not the hurried eating of a man who has been working and is hungry, not the leisured eating of a feast, but a middle pace, a deliberate pace, the pace of a man who is nourishing his body with appropriate attention, neither rushing nor dawdling, the mind occupied above by the reader's text, the body occupied below by the food. You are still learning this pace. You sometimes eat faster than the refectory requires, finishing before the brothers around you, and must then wait in silence, with your hands folded, which is a good practice, if an uncomfortable one. You watch the brother 2 seats down, who has been here long enough that his pace is the refectory's pace, who eats and listens simultaneously with the same quality of being in 2 things at once that the senior brothers bring to the offices, fully in the physical act and fully in the intellectual one, the body and the mind, not competing but cooperating. The reader's voice moves through the room above the sounds of eating. The text is the dialogues today, the stories of the holy men of the desert, their severe and patient lives, the tests they set themselves, and the tests the desert set them, the long silences, and the brief exchanges that constitute their wisdom. The refectory listens in the way that a room listens when it has no choice. Some brothers attending closely, some attending to the food, some in the particular glaze of men who have been awake since before vigils, and whose bodies are now engaged in the warming work of digestion, and finding it difficult to attend to anything else. The reader reads at the same pace regardless. The text does not adjust to its reception. After dinner, there is a period of rest, not sleep, not the long rest of the summer afternoon that the rule permits in other seasons, but a brief interval, perhaps 30 minutes, in which the brothers are permitted to read in the cloister walk or to sit quietly in their carols. This interval has the quality of a gift, unexpected in its length, more valuable for being brief. The cloister walk in winter is cold, but protected from the wind, and the north walk, receiving what sun exists, is almost warm on a clear day. You sit in the north walk on the stone bench built into the wall and hold your book, the small psalter that is the personal property the rule allows, smooth covered, worn at the corners from handling, and you read, or you appear to read, the afternoon light coming through the arcade arches across the garth, the frost still on the grass of the garth in the shadow where the sun has not reached. The cold of the bench comes up through the wool of your habit. You adjust. None comes and goes. The mid-afternoon office, the office that occurs at the 9th hour, a brief gathering and release, the hours of the day ticked off like beads on a string. After none, the working hours resume, back to the scriptorium for some, the garden for others, the kitchen for the brother whose week it is in the kitchen, the bakehouse, the almonry, where the poor of the surrounding parishes come for the daily distribution of the bread and the occasional coin, the stable, the mill, the guest house where the 2 travellers who arrived yesterday afternoon are being housed and fed according to the rule's requirement that every guest be received as Christ, a formulation whose implications are considered afresh each time a difficult or demanding guest arrives. You go back to the scriptorium. The afternoon light in the north windows is already lower, already less useful, the day beginning its early winter retreat toward dark. The fire in the corner has been banked back to almost nothing, and must be built up again, which the brother nearest it does, quickly, without fuss, adding the small pieces of wood in the particular arrangement that draws well in the scriptorium's hearth, which is a smaller hearth than the one in the warming room and requires more careful management. The warmth it gives, when it gets going, reaches perhaps a third of the room. The brothers in the farther carols are mostly beyond it. You sit at your carol. Your eyes take a moment to readjust to close work after the afternoon's distance. The gardens outdoors, the cloister walk, the interval of looking at relatively large things. The vellum before you seems very small, the ruled lines very close together, the letters of the exemplar very precise. You hold the pen and you let the eyes settle, and then you begin. The afternoon's copying is different from the morning's. The morning has an energy to it, a freshness, the hand coming to the work after the offices with something that, while not quite eagerness is not the correct disposition for this work, is at least readiness. The afternoon is harder, the light is lower and colder. The hand has already done several hours of fine work and is less precise for it. The letters coming slightly less evenly, the pressure on the nib slightly less consistent. You are aware of this, and you compensate. You work more slowly, more deliberately, checking each letter against the exemplar more carefully, accepting a reduced quantity of output in exchange for maintained quality. The book must be right. A book with errors is a book that corrupts what it copies, that sends its errors forward into every mind that reads from it. The responsibility of the scriptorium is a responsibility that compounds over time. You write. The bells mark the time. Vespers, in the late afternoon when the light is going out of the windows and the scriptorium is beginning to feel its own darkness. The candles lit now at each carol, small flames that illuminate each man's immediate work, and nothing beyond it. The carols becoming islands of close yellow light in the dimming room. Vespers is the hinge of the evening, the office that turns the day toward its close, the psalms of Vespers, the psalms of thanksgiving and completion, the day assessed and offered. You file out of the scriptorium with the others, the pen put away, the work covered with a cloth against the candle wax and the dust of the night, and you walk through the cloister to the church. Vespers is sung in this light. The voices are different at Vespers from any other office, fuller, warmer, the day's work in them, the cumulative presence of all the hours since Vigils. The psalms of Vespers are among the most familiar, the most deeply held, and they are sung here with a completeness that Vigils sometimes lacks. Not because Vigils is less important, it is the night office, it holds its own solemnity, but because the voices at Vespers have been awake and working for 12 hours, and have come to the evening office ready in a different way, the day's labour lending something to the praise. The church in the late afternoon in winter has a particular quality of gloom that it does not have at any other time. The east window, which in the morning catches whatever light the day offers, and holds it, and sends it back as colour through the glass, the blues and the red of the glass, the figures in their panels, the Christ in majesty above the apostles below, is now reversed, a dark shape in a darker wall, the light behind it gone. What light there is comes from the altar candles, and the candles in the choir stalls, small and warm and insufficient for the space, which is vast enough to absorb all this light and still be dark. The nave beyond the choir a cavern, the columns disappearing into shadow before they reach the vaulting above. The stone floor, the stone walls, the stone columns, all of it the color of grey in the candlelight, the warmth of the light touching the carved faces of the corbels and the choir stalls' misericords, finding all the small worked human things in the church and making them briefly intimate before the shadow takes them back. After Vespers, supper. Supper is lighter than dinner, the second meal of the day, simpler, the bread and the cheese and whatever the kitchen can produce with small effort at the end of a working day. The reader reads again, a different text now, the evening text briefer, the reader's voice a little lower as the hall and the day wind down together. You eat the bread and the cheese and you drink the thin ale, and you feel the day in your body. The specific way a day at the scriptorium and in the garden and through 8 hours of office feels in a body that has been doing this for a week, which is different from how it will feel after a month, and different again from how it must feel after a year or a decade. It aches, not painfully, not the ache of damage or illness, but the ache of a body that has been held in one position for long hours, that has knelt on stone floors through the cold offices, that has bent over a desk and then bent over garden beds, that has been cold for much of the day and warm only in the close moments near a fire. This ache is not a complaint the body is making, it is a report. The body is accurate in its reporting, and has no particular interest in whether the report is convenient. The candles on the refectory tables are burning low by the time supper ends, the hall dimmer than it was at the start of the meal, the shapes of the brothers around you becoming less distinct in the reduced light, the white of the habits going grey, the faces going dim. There is a quality to the end of supper in the refectory that has no equivalent elsewhere in the day. The community gathered for the last time before silence, still at table, the bread and cheese mostly gone, the ale mostly drunk, the reader's text come to its evening close, the hall waiting for the signal to rise and file out and end the speaking day. The prior nods. You stand. You file out in the order you came in, the cloister receiving you for the last time today, the garth visible through the arches pale in the last of the evening light, the sky above it the deep blue of the last half hour before full dark. The cold of the cloister in the evening is the sharpest cold of the day, the ground having given up whatever the sun gave it, the temperature falling freely now through the evening toward whatever the night will be. After supper, Compline. The last office of the day is short, and it is the most beautiful of the hours in the way that the last of anything tends toward its own quality. The day ending, the community gathered for the final time before silence, the psalms of night commended into darkness. The church at Compline has a different atmosphere from the church at any other office. The day's work fully behind everyone in it, the night fully ahead, the congregation arrived at a point of genuine conclusion rather than the interim quality that most of the daytime offices carry, the sense at terce or sext or none that the day is ongoing, that the office is a pause in the middle of something else. Compline is not a pause. Compline is the end, and the Church holds this knowledge. The Nunc Dimittis is sung at Compline, the Canticle of Simeon, the old man in the temple who has waited his whole life to see what he was promised, and now that he has seen it, asks only to be released, to go in peace, his eyes having seen what they were waiting for. The community sings it quietly, in the near dark of the church at the evening's edge, the candles on the altar the whole of the light now, everything beyond them in shadow, the familiar stone gone into the dark above and on all sides. Then the Salve Regina at the close, the Marian antiphon sung facing the altar, the whole community's voice together. And this has a quality at this hour that it could not have at any other. The voices have been working all day. The silences between phrases have the rooms cold in them. The candles on the altar are the last light, the tired voices singing from somewhere deeper than the day's surface, from the place the fatigue has stripped down to. After the final blessing, silence. The great silence falls like something physical, not the absence of sound. The church still breathes, the feet still find the stone, but the absence of intention to speak, the withdrawal of the voice from the world's economy, the community going inward in the way that the night requires. You file up the night stair, back to the dormitory, back to the mattress and the wool blanket and the cold floor and the dark. You lie down. The dormitory is completely quiet. Around you the shapes of 30 men settling into sleep, each of them arrived at this same point by the same route, the same bell at Vigils, the same offices, the same work, the same meals, the same cold cloister walk and cold garden and cold church. 30 men who have been at this for years, some of them for most of their lives, having come here as oblates, as boys of 7 or 8, given by their families to the monastic life, having grown up inside this rhythm, the rule the air. They breathe, and you, here for a week, lying in the dark with the shape of the day still vivid in your body. The hours turn. There is a quality to the first days inside the monastic rhythm that no amount of preparation can fully anticipate, the sense of time as a different substance. Outside these walls, time is directional, narrative, going somewhere, toward an event, toward a season's end, toward a completed task. Inside the walls, time is cyclical, in a way that is at first disorienting, and then, gradually, something else. The offices return, the bells return, the same psalms return in their rotation, and the same garden needs the same tending, and the same fire in the scriptorium needs building up on the same cold afternoons. And in this return, there is something that you are beginning, only beginning, at the end of one day, to recognize as a quality of freedom rather than constraint, the freedom of a life whose shape is given, whose hours are structured by something outside your own preference, so that what you bring to each hour is not the management of it, but the inhabiting of it. The dormitory breathes around you. On the second morning, the bell at Vigils is less of a shock. You rise more quickly, the body's resistance slightly less, not because you have slept more, you have not, but because something in the sequence of the days has begun to take hold, the rhythm establishing itself in the body the way a path establishes itself in grass, one passage after another, making the way clearer, the resistance less. You dress in the dark with greater ease. You find the night stair without hesitation. You find your stall in the choir by touch, and the misericord fits your hand as though it has been shaped for it, which in a sense it has, shaped by 100 hands before yours, that found this same grip in this same dark. The second morning, the cold is still the cold. You have not somehow become immune to it, the stone floor no warmer under your feet than it was yesterday. But your relationship to it has changed very slightly. You are no longer surprised by it. You know it will be there when your feet find the floor, and you have stopped in some small way, waiting for it to be otherwise. This is the beginning of accommodation, not the end. The end of accommodation, the point at which the cold is simply the medium you live in, the way fish live in water. That is months away, possibly years. But the beginning is this. You know the cold is coming, and you rise anyway. The psalms of Vigils open. You know more of them than you did on the first night. Not all of them, not yet. The full Psalter in rotation takes weeks to cycle through, and you are weeks away from knowing it as the senior brothers know it, the Latin that flows beneath thought. But the most repeated ones, the ones that come every week at this office, are beginning to arrive before your mind reaches for them. The next phrase forming in your mouth, while the previous one is still in the air. This is how it begins. This is the first small evidence that the accumulation is working, that the hours spent in the choir are settling into somewhere more permanent than memory. The cantor's voice opens the antiphon. The stone receives it. On the third day there is chapter. The chapter meeting is held in the chapter house each morning after prime. The community assembled in its tiered seats around the 3 walls of the octagonal room, the abbot or prior at the centre, the day's business conducted in the order prescribed, the reading from the rule, the martyrology for the feast of whatever saint the calendar holds, the day's assignments given, the correction of faults. The correction of faults is the part of chapter that the novices dread, and the senior brothers have long since made peace with. The accounting, before the community, of the failures of the past day. Not a shaming, or not intended as one, though the intention and the experience are not always identical, but a practice of accountability, the recognition that a life lived in community is a life whose errors affect more than yourself, that the monk who arrives late to the office, or who was heard speaking in the dormitory, or who allowed his attention to wander visibly during Vespers, has disturbed the community's peace as well as his own. You sit in the chapter house and you listen. The abbot speaks briefly today. The feast is a minor one. The business is ordinary. The assignments distributed without particular ceremony. The correction of faults is short. One brother accounts for having broken a bowl in the kitchen, which was an accident, which is received and noted. The chapter is over in 30 minutes, the community dispersing into the morning hours. There is the infirmary to visit before the garden. The infirmary is in the east range, set apart from the main cloister in its own precinct, a long room with beds along both walls and a fire at the end, larger than the one in the warming room, burning with a consistency that the rest of the house does not need to maintain. The sick are always warm in the infirmary. This is a point of discipline as much as care. The body that has been given to God's service must be attended to with the same seriousness that you attend to everything else, and a body that is ill requires warmth the way the scriptorium requires light, as the basic condition of the work. There are 4 brothers in the infirmary at present. One of them is old, very old, the oldest in the house, a man who came here as a boy, and has not left the precinct in 60 years, whose body has arrived at the stage of age where it requires the infirmary's warmth and constant attendance without being sick in any particular way, simply old, the body's resources committed entirely to the work of remaining, with nothing left over for cold or distance. He is sitting up in his bed when you come in, wrapped in extra wool, with a book open on his lap, reading with the focused attention of a man who finds a great deal still worth reading. He does not look up when you enter. You do not expect him to. The infirmarian, a brother of middle years with the particular combination of practical skill and steady temperament that the work requires, shows you what needs doing: the water to be heated, the dressings on the younger brother's hand to be changed, the broth to be brought from the kitchen and given to the one who has had the fever since Tuesday. You do these things carefully, the infirmarian watching without appearing to watch, the way experienced people in their own domains always watch someone new doing their work. The brother with the fever is a young man, younger than you, who arrived at the house only recently, and whose body, still adjusting to the conditions of the life, has found the damp cold of this season harder than expected. He is awake, but not fully present, the fever holding him at a remove from the room, his eyes tracking you as you bring the broth, but without full recognition. You set the broth on the wooden board beside the bed. You help him sit up. You hold the bowl while he manages the spoon with hands that are not entirely steady. He eats most of it. When you leave the infirmary, the cold of the cloister receives you with a completeness that makes the infirmary's warmth vivid by contrast, the warmth still on your face and hands for a few steps before the air takes it back. You walk to the garden. You have been sent to the warming room, which is not a reward exactly. Nowhere in the monastic life is anywhere a reward exactly, but which is understood to be a different kind of work from the scriptorium, less skilled, more physical, the warming room requiring the service of brothers who will keep the fire going and attend to the brothers who come to warm themselves at the permitted times. The warming room is the one room in the cloister complex besides the kitchen where a large fire burns continuously through the winter, a fire designed to provide genuine warmth to the community at the intervals when the schedule permits it. Brothers come to the warming room after terce and after none, in small groups, to warm their hands and feet before returning to the cold of the rest of the cloister. You keep the fire. This is the work of the warming room, the fire. It must be built before the first groups arrive, built large enough to provide real warmth to a dozen people standing around it, maintained through the morning and afternoon, fed with wood at the correct intervals to keep it at the right level, not a roaring fire that would fill the room with smoke, not a dying fire that would fail in its purpose, but a steady, generous fire that does what it is there to do. The wood is stacked in the alcove off the room, split and dried, the good oak that burns long. You feed it with the attention you have been bringing to everything this week, the specific attention of a person who has learned in a short time that attention is what is asked of you here, that the rule's demand is not for speed or brilliance or any of the qualities the world outside values, but for presence, for the quality of mind that is fully in the room it is in, fully in the task it is doing, without the remainder of itself somewhere else. The fire is worth this attention. There is a satisfaction in maintaining a good fire that has no equivalent in the finer work of the scriptorium. The scriptorium produces something external, accumulates on the page, can be seen and measured. 10 lines copied today, 12 yesterday, the text advancing by increments toward the end of the gathering. The fire produces nothing that can be shown. It produces warmth, which is a condition, not an object, which exists only in the moment of experiencing it, and cannot be carried out of the room. And yet the care you bring to it, the wood added at the right moment, the poker adjusting the arrangement to improve the draw, the ash cleared from the edges to make room for new fuel. This care is visible in the quality of the fire, in the consistency of its heat, in the way it holds through the full permitted period without requiring intervention at the wrong moment. The brothers come in pairs, in the brief intervals the schedule permits, and they stand near the fire with their hands out and their hoods down and their faces toward the warmth. And there is a quality to these moments in the warming room that is unlike the quality of any other moment in the day. A relaxation, not of discipline. The silence is still observed, the composure still maintained, but of the body's held tension, the cold managing that has been going on since Vigils finally getting to put itself down for a few minutes. You watch the fire. You watch the brothers come and go. The senior brothers who have been here longest carry their warmth differently from the newer ones. The long acclimation to the cold of the cloister has made them a certain kind of patient in their bodies, a stillness in the cold that the recent arrivals haven't yet developed, a quality of existing in a cold room without fighting it. You watch one of the older monks, a man whose face is deeply lined, whose hair is the grey of the stone walls, who has been at Lord's every morning for 40 years, stand at the fire with his hands out, and his face, in the warmth of it, goes very still and very present, the way faces go when they are finally warm. A particular opening, a releasing. You think, this is what the week is for. Not the scriptorium alone, not the garden alone, not the offices alone. All of it together. The cold that makes the warmth necessary. The silence that makes speech precious. The regularity that makes the fire in the warming room, for 5 minutes on a grey afternoon, something worth standing still for. You add a piece of wood. The 4th day brings snow. You hear it before you see it. Not the snow itself, which is silent, but the change in the morning sounds, the particular quality of muffled quiet that snow gives to the world outside. When you come down the night stair for Vigils, the cold at the bottom is sharper than usual. The cloister beyond the church door, carrying that specific crystalline quality of a snowfall that has settled and is sitting. During the office the chancel fills, slowly, with the light that is different from any other light the church admits. The snow light, reflected up from the garth through the cloister arcade windows. A pale, diffuse, sourceless brightness that makes the stone of the chancel appear to have its own luminosity, the walls giving back a light they seem to have stored. After Lord's you step into the cloister walk. The garth is white and unmarked, the snow perfect on the grass and on the low box hedges at the garth's edge, on the stone coping of the arcade arches, on the lead of the chapter house roof. A few flakes still fall, the last of the snow finding its way down out of a sky that is the same pale grey as the snow itself. Sky and ground become one colour. The world contracted to the close, pale space of the cloister. Your breath makes shapes. The footprints you leave in the snow of the covered walkway are the only footprints, the first of the day. And this is a strange feeling, a feeling of precedence that monastic life almost never gives you. The community having arrived at every corner of this precinct before you. having walked every path you walk, having said every prayer you say, having occupied every hour of the day's structure with the weight of their prior occupying. But in snow, the first footprints are yours, a small thing, not nothing. The fifth day, you begin to understand the fatigue. Not the fatigue of the body alone, though the body is genuinely tired, the cumulative effect of shortened nights and cold days, and the constant kneeling and standing of the offices taking its toll on the joints, the back, the knees especially, the stone floors of the church not yielding, but a fatigue that is also mental, a particular quality of tiredness that comes from sustained attention. The rule demands attention. Every hour demands attention. The offices demand that you be in them rather than merely present at them, that your mind be on the psalm and not on the bread you ate at supper, or the letter from home that arrived 3 days ago, and that you have not been given time to read, and about which you have been thinking, intermittently and without intention, ever since it arrived. The letter is a small folded thing left in your carrel by the brother who manages the correspondence of the house, deposited without ceremony, to be read in the permitted reading time at the prior's discretion. You have not been given permission to read it. You do not ask for permission, because the timing of the giving is the prior's matter, not yours. And the practice here is not to ask, but to wait. And waiting is itself a practice, a small version of the same practice that governs the whole of the life. The subordination of your own timing to the house's timing, your own preference to the structure that precedes you and will outlast you. But the letter is there, and the mind knows the letter is there. The rule is not unaware of this. The rule was written by a man who knew what a mind does when asked to be still, who knew the quality of the distraction that arises not from wickedness, but from the ordinary restlessness of a human mind, placed in a structure that asks more of it than the human mind naturally wants to give. The corrections that chapter makes, the accountings for attention that has wandered, the small corrections of the novice master, these are not punishments for failure. They are acknowledgments that the project is difficult, that the monk is always in process, always becoming rather than having become. This is the monastic project in its most honest formulation, not the achievement of a state, but the daily practice of a direction. You kneel at Vespers on the 5th evening, and your knees are the full record of 5 days. You sing the psalm, and you feel the tired in your voice and in your body and in the quality of your attention, which is thinner today than on the first day, which is producing warmth less easily. But the psalm continues, and your voice continues with it, and the brother beside you sings steadily, and the brothers across the choir sing steadily, and the stone receives all of it with the same impartiality it has always had, and the candles burn on the altar with the same unconcern for how tired you are. And something in this, in the indifference of the practice to your current condition, in the continuation of the hours regardless of what you bring to them, is, despite everything, a form of rest. The practice does not need you to be at your best. The practice needs you to be present. These are not the same thing, and the difference between them is one of the week's more important discoveries. On the 5th evening, you are not at your best. You are present. You are in the choir, in your stall, with the cold stone at your back, and the candle at the reading desk, and the voices of your brothers around you, and the vaulted dark above. You are in this specific cold room, in this specific body, with this specific amount of sleep behind you and ahead of you, and you are singing. And the singing is not what it was on the first morning, is not fresh or careful in the way it was then, is rough at the edges and lower in the range. It is the 5th day's singing. It is enough. On the 6th morning you rise for vigils, and something is different. You don't identify it until you're in the choir, in your stall, the cantor's voice opening the first antiphon, and you hear it. You hear the psalm, not as a sequence of words to be reproduced with the lips, not as a text to be tracked with the eye in the candle-lit choir book, but as something that is already in you, arriving from somewhere below intention. The Latin that has been filling your ears and your mouth for 6 days has been going somewhere, and this morning it arrives back as something changed, more itself, more present. The psalm opens, and your voice joins it, and the voices of the brothers join it, and the stone joins it, and for a long moment, 2 minutes, 3, the length of the antiphon, you are not performing a practice. You are inside it. This fades. Of course it fades. The next psalm requires the choir book, requires the eye to track, requires effort. But it happened, and in happening it demonstrated something about the direction of things, about where the practice is pointed, not toward a state that can be achieved and held, but toward moments of opening that become gradually less rare, that become the texture of a life rather than its occasional features. You stand in the cold choir in the dark, and you sing. After vigils, there is a short interval before Lauds in which the brothers are permitted to read or to sit in the church in private prayer, and you go to the library. The library is a small room off the cloister, the books chained to their desks, not because anyone is suspected of theft, or not primarily, but because the books are valuable in the specific sense of being difficult to replace, each one the product of months of a brother's careful work. The library's holdings built up over a century of mornings like the mornings you have just had in the scriptorium. The books are chained to their desks the way the liturgical vessels are kept in the sacristy, with the respect appropriate to irreplaceable things. The room is dark at this hour. Only the small lamp the sacrist keeps burning in the corner, enough to see the shelves and the shapes of the volumes on them, the big liturgical books, the psalters and the antiphonas and the graduals, their spines facing you as you move along, the shelves, the small volumes of the fathers, the commentary on the rule, the medical texts in the infirmary section, the hagiographies that the refectory reader draws on. You run your finger along the spines without taking anything down. You are not here to read. You are here for the room. There is something about the library at this hour that is its own form of office, the concentration of writing, the accumulated thought of all the men who wrote and copied these words in rooms like the scriptorium, the voices of the text available here in a way they are not in the church or the cloister, the church being the place of spoken prayer, and the library being the place where prayer's other form, the written form, the thinking form, the form that requires a desk and a candle in a winter morning, is kept and tended. You stand in the library for a few minutes and breathe its smell, old vellum, leather bindings, the faint sweet smell of beeswax from the lamp, the particular smell of many books in a small enclosed space that is unlike the smell of any individual book, and unlike the smell of anything else. Then the bell for Lauds. You go back to the church. The 6th day's work takes you to the almonry. The almonry is at the outer gate. the building that stands between the inner precinct and the world outside, the point of contact between the monastic community and the poor and the travellers and the sick and the simply hungry who come to the gate each morning for what the abbey can give. The almoner, an older brother, with the particular quality of a man who has been dealing with the world's need for many years, distributes the bread and the occasional coin and the occasional piece of clothing from the box of donated things, with a practice that is neither hurried nor sentimental, that gives what it has to give without ceremony and without the excessive attachment to its own generosity that can sometimes be worse than giving nothing. You carry the bread. The morning distribution is the loaves left from yesterday's baking, the ones that are a day old and will be 2 days old by supper, and past their best for the refectory table. They are still good bread. The abbey's bread is always good bread, and the people at the gate receive them with the specific quality of receiving that belongs to people who are genuinely hungry and have come to the gate knowing what the gate gives. There are perhaps a dozen of them today in the cold of the outer yard, some of them from the village nearest the abbey, some of them travellers whose clothes and general condition suggest the road has been unkind to them. One of them, a woman with a child who sits very still on her hip, with the huge eyes of a child who has been cold for a long time and has learned that being still is part of managing it. You give the child a piece of bread. She takes it in both hands and looks at it in the way that the youngest do, the serious examining look, and then she eats it. The woman does not speak. You do not speak. You are in the silence, this being before none, the speaking hours not yet open. But you look at each other for a moment across the bread, the woman and you, and whatever passes in that look has nothing to do with the rule and nothing to do with any of the practices of this week, and everything to do with the transaction of bread and hunger and the cold morning and the child with her piece of bread. The almoner moves on. You carry what is left of the bread back into the precinct. On the 7th morning you wake before the bell. This is a thing that happens to people who have been living by a bell for long enough. The body internalizes the schedule, takes the bell's rhythm into itself, and begins to anticipate it. You are awake in the dormitory, with the dark around you, and the cold above the blanket, and the breathing of the brothers around you. And you know the bell is coming, and you are already on the other side of the threshold, between sleep and waking, before it rings. When the bell comes, it finds you ready. For the first time this week, it finds you ready. You rise. The night stair, the church, the choir stall, the cold and the dark, and the 2 candles on the altar, the cantor's voice, and the antiphon opening, and your voice joining it, and the voices of the brothers across the choir joining it, and the stone receiving all of it. After the 7th Vespers, the light is going out of the east window. The blue of the glass, which the morning light makes brilliant, is now just colour, the light behind it gone, the figures in their panels dark and still. The candles on the altar are the whole light of the chancel end. The voices of the brothers fill the church as they have filled it every evening of this week, the same psalms in their rotation, the same stone receiving them, the same dark ascending in the vaulting above. You stand in your stall, you sing. The office completes itself, and the brothers file out, and the church receives the silence it always returns to between the offices, the candles left burning on the altar, the small lights in the immensity of the stone. Outside the church, the cloister walk holds the last of the evening cold, the garth pale with the snow that has remained through the week, the light almost gone from the sky above it. You walk the cloister. The sound of your footsteps on the stone is your own sound, the particular sound of your particular weight and pace on this particular floor. Every other footstep that has moved through this cloister walk over the years, over the decades, has also made this sound, and the stone has received all of them the same way, without preference, without record. You are walking in a channel worn smooth by the passage of many feet over many years, this same turning at the corner, this same glance up at the sky of the garth. The sky is clear again, stars very bright in the cold. You stop walking and you look up through the open square of the garth at the stars, and they are the stars of winter, the cold ones, the ones that appear in the months when the air is dry enough to hold nothing between you and them. Every one of them sharp, none of them soft. The dark between them, the absolute dark that the human eye has been looking at since long before this cloister existed, since long before this precinct, since before the first stone of any building on this ground was laid by any hand. The cold is coming down through the air above the garth. It finds the exposed skin above your habit. It finds the backs of your hands. You have been cold all week. Cold in the church at Vigils. Cold in the dormitory passage. Cold in the garden. Cold in the scriptorium before the fire found its level. Cold in the cloister on every night walk between the offices. Cold the way a person is cold who has taken up residence in cold spaces and has made their accommodation with it. Not comfortable, not indifferent, but managed, known, the cold integrated into the practice rather than opposed to it. The cold is part of what this is. A warm monastery would be a different place. Not worse necessarily, you don't know enough yet to say, but different. The cold being part of the texture of the practice here in ways that you are only beginning to understand. It keeps you awake in the night office. It provides the contrast that makes the warming room's fire genuinely meaningful. It is part of the daily reminder that the body's needs are real and must be attended to, and are also not the final consideration. The cold is the world's reminder that you are in it, that the stone walls that separate the cloister from the world outside do not separate it from winter, that winter is not a condition the monastery escapes, but a condition it inhabits, along with every other season, the monastery's relationship with the weather being the same as its relationship with everything else. Not the avoidance of what is difficult, but the living of it, with the full attention of a community that has decided to be present. You breathe the cold air. Then the bell for Compline rings. You go in. The last office is brief and complete. The Salve Regina at its close rising into the dark of the church and returning from the stone as something larger, the voices of the community together, tired and warm and cold and present, offering back to the dark what the dark gave them this week, the hours, the silence, the psalms, the fire, the cold, the bread, the blessing, the silence, the night stare. You lie down in the dormitory in the dark, the cold above the blanket, the breathing of the brothers around you slowing as sleep finds them one by one. the dormitory quieting itself for the short interval before the bell returns. Below you, somewhere, the church holds its candles and its cold and its centuries of accumulated prayer. Outside, the snow on the garth, the clear night, the stars that were there before the building and will be there after it. You have been here 1 week. 1 week is not long. 1 week is the first week, the week in which the body adjusts and the mind begins its adjustment, and the practices that seemed severe or strange, or both, begin to reveal their logic, begin to be understood not from the outside, but from inside, from the experience of living them. 1 week is the beginning of the beginning. The senior brothers around you have been here for years, for decades. The brother to your left, whose voice in the offices is the most certain voice in the choir, whose psalms arrive with the completeness of something that has had 30 years to settle and become itself. He came here at 20, or at 15, or younger still, and whatever the world offered him at any of those ages, he came here instead, to this room, this cold, this bell in the night, this fire in the warming room, this vellum and this pen and this garden and this bread. Not chose, perhaps, was drawn, was called. The language the brothers use for how they came to be here is not the language of choice. Choice implies alternatives equally weighted, and the brothers who stay long do not speak of staying, as though not staying was ever a real alternative. They speak of it the way water speaks of its course, not as a decision made at each bend, but as the inevitable direction of a thing that has found its level. You don't know if this is your level. You don't need to know. Not this week. This week has asked only that you be present in each hour as it arrived, that you bring your hands to the scriptorium, and your voice to the choir, and your attention to the garden, and your body to the cold offices, and not require any of it to explain itself before you did it. The week asked you to be inside the practice, rather than observing the practice, and to whatever degree you have managed this, imperfectly, partially, with the full allowance of a beginner's limits. The week has given back something in proportion, not an answer, a direction, a quality of attention beginning to settle into the body, beginning to become its own kind of knowledge, the way the psalms are beginning to settle, the way the cold is beginning to be known rather than merely endured. The dormitory breathes around you. 30 men, each of them in their own arrangement with the blanket and the straw and the cold, each of them holding the day's offices in their bodies the way a vessel holds water, the Latin still present, the psalms still moving below thought, the quality of the hours carried forward into sleep. You feel this in your own body, the day not fully released yet, the words of Compline still present somewhere, the last sound of the Salve Regina still available if you reach for it. You don't reach for it. You let it be where it is, underneath, and you let the silence of the dormitory and the breathing of the brothers and the cold above the blanket and the straw beneath you simply be what they are. The bell has not rung yet. You breathe. The cold above the blanket is the cold you know now. The bell, when it comes, will find you already part way through the waking, the body returning from sleep before the sound arrives, the body having internalized the hour in a way it had not 7 days ago, when the bell was still a violence committed against sleep, rather than a signal understood and anticipated. You will rise. Your feet will find the cold floor. Your hands will find the habit in the dark. You will go down the stairs that your feet know now. Find the stall that knows your hand. Open your mouth for the psalm that is beginning again, always beginning in the dark before the light. The garth is still outside, the snow on it unmarked, the stars out, and very cold and very bright. You breathe.